So that's the title of my paper, and I just want to start by saying I've scripted, so it's a little bit different. I took a little lesson from this morning, and I've scripted the whole thing. All right, big data is changing how we understand human behavior, and that will change understandings of information behavior and information-seeking behavior. Such behavior is a focus of study within libraries as it recognizes the importance of understanding us as we utilize information sources. How then will librarians teach users to gain information, that is, acquire information literacy? As big data changes human interaction with information and the way such behavior is both studied and taught, just as importantly, big data will also orient information behavior towards commercial ends. Put simply, in this paper, I hope to explore the impact of big data on information literacy, which I see as a vital tool for librarians. Kevin Rowe, in his article, Meta-Theory in Library and Information Science, a nascent social science justice approach, articulates the long-held altruistic stance of library information science and defines 5 assumptions of library information science social justice meta-theory. The 5th one is most explicit about the role of power. Quote, access, control, and mediation of information contain inherent power relationships. The act of distributing information is itself a political act, end of quote. But what happens if the social science underlying the work of librarians changes, as big data is definitely doing? In social physics, How Good Ideas Spread, the lessons from a new science, Alex Pentland calls for a new science that he calls social physics, in part because, quote, the scientific method as currently practiced in the social sciences is failing us and threatens to collapse in the era of big data, end of quote. Pentland describes collection of big data through proposed living laboratories and his current use of a badge that records a wearer's behavior and behavior measurement software for smartphones. All developments that might be difficult to accept for a host of ethical and moral reasons concerning privacy, or the use of such private information to benefit not the subject of study, but of those who gather such information. Pentland goes further. The social physics I envision, though acknowledges our human capacity for independent thought, but does not try to account for it. This loss of accounting for human behavior is in line with a drift towards behaviorism that seems to arise from social sciences that rely primarily on big data. So we lose privacy to benefit someone else, and we lose an interest in accounting for human thought. What does this mean? You can think independently, but why you do as you do, or why you may want to, is irrelevant for social physics. This fits well with an infamous quote from Chris Anderson, a longtime editor at Wired, who wrote, out with every theory of human behavior, from linguistics to sociology. Forget taxonomy, ontology, and psychology. Who knows why people do what they do? The point is they do it, and we can track and measure it with unprecedented fidelity. Unfortunately, he was anticipated in his thoughts by Paul Virilio, who wrote, after the authority of human beings over their history, are we going to yield with the acceleration of the real to the authority of machines and those who program them? While Virilio is writing about the development of science since the Cold War in areas like robotics or genetic engineering, his chief concern is with the science that is instrumentalist in nature and not directed towards truth. That is, science is becoming a knowledge which denies all objective reality. If Anderson is happy to dispense with a concern regarding why people do what they do, Virilio is dismayed by a science that, with a seeming disregard for any effort to discover a coherent truth useful to humanity. Simply stated, Virilio sees disaster in a science cut off from its ethical humanist past, tied to the development of human knowledge, while Anderson crystallizes an opposing laudatory understanding of big data's promise to dispense with such concerns. In this latter view, it will no longer be necessary to understand why people do what they do, as big data doesn't seem to need the traditional social sciences listed by Anderson. Where does this leave those who care about why we use information? I like to think shunted off to the side. In the library, instructing users or information literacy is key, but like everyone, we live in a world of ever more commercial information. Gracian and Kaplowitz, in information literacy instruction, recognize the powerful and political nature of the information commodity, and so deplore a fruitless attempt to convince them, that is, users, to start their search somewhere other than Google. The information commodity described here is easily understood by the invocation of Google, which has certainly a bad name, I think, particularly in Europe. But this type of commodity is, of course, not limited to Google or its products, as a view of Gracian and Kaplowitz's chapter, The Psychology of Learning from Information Literacy Structure, indicates. There they describe in detail the use of learning theory in information literacy. Ultimately, learning theory within information literacy, strategies and curricula range from theory that spans to behaviorist, cognitive, constructivist, and even humanist schema. There is also a preference for cognitive and constructivist approaches, beginning with Kultow, a preference further endorsed in the UNESCO document Towards Information Literacy Indicators. Gracian and Kaplowitz further suggest librarians formulate a definition of information literacy that is personally meaningful and works in your specific environment. This practical understanding neatly accepts that librarians should work with users as they find them. That is, in the world where the information commodity and the infrastructure that ensure their delivery are ever more common. On the subject of learning, however, the implications of big data are far greater than Gracian and Kaplowitz could have imagined. In one passage from the book, The Naked Future, Patrick Tucker recalls a conversation he had with the highly regarded artificial intelligence expert Peter Norvig. We're going to make rapid advances in understanding what works and what doesn't work based on the basis of interaction statistics, he, Norvig, told me. I asked him if he believed every student would have access to a predictive model of their own learning style in the next 5 years, if, in effect, there was a naked future for education. That's the hope, he answered. This conversation is part of the chapter Relearning How to Learn that describes how detailed data on even the most minute aspect of a student's academic performance, as opposed to summative grades or tests, would reveal areas of confusion, problems with self-esteem, and the role of group interaction as they affect learning. Sadly, all of this is quite possibly at the price of a student's privacy. That is why Tucker uses the word naked in his title, as it describes this loss of privacy. The resulting changes in education promise to be great, but I'm most interested in what this means for learning theory and information literacy. Like most examinations of big data, the results point to the specific areas of learning, or as Norvig put it, what works and what doesn't on the basis of interaction statistics, which leaves larger questions unanswered. That is, learning theory goes largely unaddressed, and in this chapter, in favor of an open-ended understanding that education simply has to change. Tucker, like most proponents of big data, is not concerned about why learning should happen, a concern librarians teaching information literacy might have, but rather with how to learn. Big data seems always to be about how things happen and not why they should or should not happen. Looking at library uses today, it's easy to understand that how is favored over why. Because, for example, if you look at my research, an article like this once required a set of physical activities located in a library. But I only went to the library to get hard copies of books and articles, now not available as downloads. Most research was accomplished at my home through the online services of my library, Chicago State University, and a browser set to Google Scholar. While this foregrounds an academic library and its educational mission, it is equally dependent on numerous commercial enterprises, particularly in the delivery of information, and this use generates big data for those commercial enterprises, in this case, my data provider. While librarians might one day find such big data useful in determining collection development, policies regarding access or other areas and needs, etc., the commercial enterprises that collect and analyze big data will not use this information for the altruistic ideals at the heart of librarianship. If elements of my research provide an example that mixes commercial institutions and a public institution, how might such information seeking look for non-academic users who make no provision for library use? Further, how far will information professionals go to accommodate the existing environment of users, and will such accommodation grow a process of data collection that seems ever more independent of the public institutions like libraries and the cultural impulses behind them, as well as the various social science fields that are devoted to understanding human behavior. Librarians have long worked in an information environment where people are shifting from traditional brick-and-mortar libraries to online enterprises where commercial firms often play a central role, or at the very least, a vital supporting role through the development and provision of digital infrastructure. The rise of big data within this changing information environment encapsulates a shift to a more mechanistic view of human behavior and information use. But as commercial aims displace important political and ethical aims that are often central to the missions espoused by libraries and the social sciences, the very altruism and power relations found in libraries are at risk. The resulting environment has led many to feel a generalized dread characterized by Patrick Tucker in the statement, "We feel we have arrived at an age in which our devices communicate about us in a language we cannot hear to parties we cannot see. Big data belongs to them, not us. We are its victims." While Tucker focuses on the threat to privacy in his book, I would tie this concern to the larger threat we face in a behaviorist future, one where solutions are indeed devised to channel humans rather than to help them realize who they are and what they want. As even Tucker concludes in a jarring echo of Virilio, the threat of creeping techno-totalitarianism is real. Virilio's fear of a more instrumentalist, contemporary science that has lost touch with a humanist past is tied to Foucault's descriptions of new power relations, where surveillance becomes ever more sophisticated and all-encompassing, an idea encapsulated in the Panopticon. Building the space of the multimedia networks with the aid of the teletechnologies surely then requires a new optic, a new global optics, capable of helping a panoptical vision to appear, a vision which is indispensable if the market of the visible is to be established. This much vaunted globalization requires that we all observe each other and compare ourselves with one another on a continual basis. This is my idea of somebody trying to watch themselves on a continual basis. I don't know how effective that was, but Virilio's market of the visible finds partial expression in the detailed records of human behavior that create big data. Now, everything from conversations to shopping, working, and every type of human interaction can leave a visible record that can also be the basis for studying what we do. This recording of human behavior, or that creeping techno-totalitarianism, is indeed something many have expressed fear about. Fortunately, though there is much I disagree with in Tucker's book, he does articulate a small hope that could aid the altruistic impulses of librarianship and favor the possibility of tipping the balance of power towards individuals in regards to information use and literacy, when he states, "Your data is yours first because you created it through your actions." With this simple statement, Tucker introduces the idea that we need to grapple with the advent of big data as a tool about ourselves that we ourselves can deploy. He wrote further, "Think of it not as a liability, but as an asset you can take ownership of and use. In the naked future, your data will help you live much more healthily, to realize more of your own goals in less time, avoid inconvenience and danger, and as detailed in his book, learn about yourself and your own future in a way that no generation in human history ever thought possible." So, good for us. I'm not so optimistic, considering the loss of privacy needed to gain the benefits that he lists. I also wonder if librarians can stay abreast of technological change and bring the best of this change to users. Despite my misgiving, at least Tucker shows a real concern with the idea that individuals can or even should use big data to better themselves, an idea that does correspond to altruistic impulses and a concern with the relationship between information and power in librarianship. Ultimately, Tucker thinks that as big data grows, it will become more common as well as cheaper and logistically more usable for individuals. This consumer-friendly big data may well be the source of an answer for those who want to empower information users. If librarians recognize the behaviorist impulse in big data and seek to both inform users of this change in information and how to utilize this data to further the goals users themselves define, then librarians can arm users with the information they need to exist in this new information environment on their own terms. Perhaps librarians can help users take charge of a potential asset, the data they generate through their own actions, and thereby give users power over their data. If that can happen, then with librarians to guide them, users might access data on themselves to pose and answer the kinds of questions that science, in the service of big data, seems to be losing sight of. Questions like, why do I do what I do? Or what do I want or need? Addressing this challenge offers a possibility that could bring social justice, community action, and librarianship into the era of big data. I'm done.